Hey guys, it is Orion Webster here. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. And today I've got a guest here, my friend Brian,
How's it going?
and got some topics laid out here that we thought we would kind of talk about today. And so I guess kind of laying out the groundwork for this, I've been um, I've been thinking a lot about the rising trend of people in our society kind of being very disconnected from reality and, you know, kind of stuck on their phones and um, using media as sort of an escape and as a way of distracting themselves from other things that you might normally be thinking about. And the idea here is kind of with this conversation is to kind of lay out why I think that's happening, what some of the problems are, and I think what we can do about it. Because I do think it is a problem. I think it has a lot of pretty obvious negative consequences when you spend all of your attention on cat videos and none of it on like fixing what's wrong with yourself. It's going to create some problems eventually, even if it doesn't like manifest right away. So
I definitely agree. It can lead to some empty-mindedness and just kind of following what people tell you you should be doing, rather than kind of thinking for yourself, advocating for yourself, and kind of taking charge and leading your own life.
yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing too. Is it's like people are always looking for a relief of responsibility. Like they're always looking for someone else to like take their life and just set them on the rails and just have them end up at whatever location at the end where
From
they're
A to
just
B.
yeah, exactly. And it's like people think if they just follow the rules and just fall in line that by the end of it they'll just have their feet propped up, you know, with a pina colada at the beach or something, and their kind of notions of retirement or whatever. But I mean, grant that's a different topic altogether. But yeah, I don't see that as being the case. I think the problem is that the the life that you live where, and I'm going to sound a little cliche here, but I mean, I think the life that isn't examined basically isn't worth living. I think the idea that you're going to go through life and never really think about anything and just kind of be on the rails and just I followed what this person said and I did what this authority told me to, and this is not any kind of like anti-authority type thing here, but I think the idea that we should sort of unblinkingly accept everything that we're told and never consider anything is silly. Like someone offers you an idea, you're supposed to think about it, digest it, and challenge it, not just sort of take it at face value and just run with it like it's, divine truth or whatever. So something that we thought we might touch on a little bit is this concept of kind of disconnecting what that actually means. And at least with the way that I'm thinking about this, I don't know about you, Brian, but I think the problem, like, it's not that people can't ever use YouTube or like go on Facebook or ever use social media again or whatever responsibly. It's just they seem to not comprehend that there's really an opportunity cost here. If you're spending all of your attention on things that just fundamentally, let's face it, aren't a good use of your time, then you're you're taking away from that time that you could be spending on something that's actually productive, something that's actually going to make you happier, that's going to improve your quality of life. And I think that's a really important point. I don't know. What are your thoughts on it?
I think I don't know a better word for this, but kind of a delegation, managing your time, is very important. Like, there's no problem with being on social media. You hear people about or saying they're going to take breaks from social media and they'll be gone for a week, and then after that week they'll be talking about how great it was, but then they'll go right back to what they were doing beforehand. and I think that that's kind of pointless. Well, it does give them a little bit of an insight, but having social media is perfectly fine. It's just not letting it consume you, not letting it control you, not, oh, I have to post something every day, or I have to conform to the new media trend, or any of those such things. It is this podcast, for example, is a form of media. It'd be kind of hypocritical for me to say, I don't use social media, right? Like, that's very untrue. I have
Can't
Instagram,
make that claim.
I have Facebook, but I don't let it control my life. I don't let it consume me. Just as for my daily habits, I maybe check Instagram once a day while I'm riding the bus, or I don't know, laying in bed right before I go to sleep, something of this nature. But I don't sit there in class scrolling through Instagram when I'm bored. It's not something to passively occupy my time.
Yeah. I mean, that actually, I'm glad you brought up kind of passively occupy your time, because I think that's the problem here is that we begin by using social media a little bit, but we don't realize that we build this habit and suddenly we're doing it 60 times a day.
All day, every day.
And any time that there is an apparent gap between like the next activity that you're supposed to be doing, our phone comes out. And it's like, oh, you're waiting for your friend that's supposed to come out in 3 minutes. You're on your phone. You know, you're like standing, or you're sitting on a bench in the park. You're on your phone. You're not looking around. You're not taking in nature. You're not thinking about anything. What are you doing? You're learning about Kim Kardashian. It's like, how is that helping you?
I'm taking this EMT class, and the medic, the teacher, the professor, whatever you want to say, he took a poll, and he was talking about this because he left his phone and wallet at home. And he was kind of talking about how he was freaking out. And, he's really big on ownership, so our class likes to not lie. It's a very tight group. We know each other very well now since the beginning of class, and it's just better not to lie in this class. And I don't know, most people are pretty honest. But he took a survey, and he said, how many of you, if you leave your phone at home or you leave your wallet at home, how many of you kind of like freak out a little bit? All but 2 people raised their hands, including me. I don't mind if I leave my phone at home. It's not the end of the world, right? But that was just kind of stunning to me that people can't go without their phone. They have to be connected in some way, shape, or form, and it's we grew up that way. But our generation grew up that way,
Yeah.
it just shocked me that we can't temporarily disconnect. Like I said, you don't have to delete all social media for the rest of your life. You just have to manage your time, and if you're gone for a day, oh no, what's gonna happen? You get back and you're gonna have an alert telling you what happened. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that's interesting is it's like, as we were kind of talking about before this, it's like a phenomenon that I really don't get because, like growing up, I had a computer like at a super young age. Like I was on a computer like 4, but it's like I've never been particularly attracted to social media. Like people who know me can attest to that. And
That's true.
like you won't find me on there, trust me. And I don't know, for whatever reason, like I don't even carry my phone on me half the time. Like I would get updates and notifications like through my computer. And not to say that I'm not on my computer, not that I'm, not using other types of media, like I'm on YouTube quite frequently. But like I think the other distinction we have to make here is that, and I'm not trying to remove myself from, the group of offenders, but I think it actually matters what you're using that media for. Because, like, you can be watching TV and you can be watching, House of Cards, or you could be watching a documentary, or you could be watching any number of things. You could just be watching a commercial. Or, you can be on YouTube and, like we were talking about earlier, you could be watching a cat video, you could be watching a guy get mauled by another person in a bear suit, or you could be learning something.
I'm glad you brought that up because there are people who have to carry their phone for work purposes. And I'd kind of like to disclude that from our topic, or it'd be something entirely different, just because work is work, and if they have to contact you, they have to contact you.
Yeah, I mean that's important. But I think that's part of, and it's not necessarily any person's fault, but that's part of the slippery slope. Is that you know you need your phone, or we're kind of told that we need our phone for this job, and then suddenly you, everybody on the planet is suddenly now vying to have a piece of your attention and your time, and it's like suddenly you weren't accessible 24/7, and now you just have this supercomputer that just gives everybody, you know, access to you in a way that wasn't possible not that long ago. And what's so strange is just that, and I was actually listening to a video where like Dave Rubin was talking about this a little bit. This was like one of those short videos that he does, if you're familiar with Rubin Report. And he was sort of talking about, I'm like losing my train of thought here for some reason.
Rubin Report.
Yeah. This doesn't usually happen. But he was. Yeah,
You can do it. You can do it.
I don't know what happened. This like has never happened before.
Okay, well, let's talk about how people are using their connectivity, they're having their phone on them to avoid confrontation, because, like you said earlier, they could be waiting for their friend for 3 minutes and they'll be on their phone the entire time, or at the dinner table and they'll have their phone on them and they'll be texting and whatnot. Just not being in the present, using it as a way to avoid social interaction, and not knowing how to deal with social interaction when it comes, or how to act in those certain situations that they're missing every day.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the weird things about this is that I'd like to think, in some sense, that the reason for the rise in kind of like social anxiety is because people are fundamentally not developing social skills, because they're just not freaking talking to people. They're on their phone. And the fact that like people will literally text someone they're sitting next to. I mean, like, how much does it take for you to be ashamed of yourself? Like, really? And I say that
that's more common than people think too.
I know, like I say that partially joking, and someone might be laughing right now, but like this is a real phenomenon where people are so, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but they're so uncomfortable with being uncomfortable in some sense, and having that natural experience of like I'm
going out of the comfort zone
and now talking to a person versus I'm like,
oh my god,
making my thumbs do the work. It's a magical experience. If you haven't done it before, you got to try it. Like, really, just like walk up to a stranger and just like, like, it's nice weather today. You might get somewhere. Seriously.
Small talk. It's easy. It's not that bad, guys.
No, but seriously, like, if you don't use your social skills, how do you expect to develop your social skills? Like, I mean, really.
Well, let's kind of digress away from talking about disconnecting being problematic, and let's talk about bringing this to the positive side. What does social media do for us? What does being connected do for us? In a sense, the quickness, the what do I want to say? What's the word?
Sort of the access.
Yeah, the access. Number one, let's talk about the internet. You have all the encyclopedias at your fingertips.
Yeah.
That does come with its own problems.
It's nice to have.
It does come with its own problems by itself. Most of us don't know how to read a map now, which is kind of pathetic if you ask me.
It's sad.
Change a tire, all that, they look it up. That's okay. But it is nice to have, and being connected is good, because if I'm stuck on the side of the road and I need to call AAA
Mm-hmm.
or something, I have a mobile phone to do so.
Yeah.
Or if you're not at home and you need to call a relative, or a relative has an emergency situation and they need to call you, they can do so, even though you're not at home with a home phone. So there is some positive light to this.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I obviously not focusing on the negative too much here, but I wouldn't suggest that we're just keeping this thing around that's just giving us nothing but headache. But the unfortunate reality of all this stuff is that, again, there are advantages that you get from having access and having more data. The problem is that the assumption that having more data alone fixes the problems is wrong, because what I find is that people think that the fact that you can Google something is a replacement for having actual expertise in something. And newsflash, it's not. Really isn't. Like, I mean, like you were just saying, like, okay, watching a YouTube video on changing a tire and actually like knowing how to change a tire are two very different phenomena. It's like it's kind of a different deal. I'm not saying you can't do it. It might not be the perfect example, but there are a lot of things where it's like, okay, but you're not going to YouTube video your way to like getting underneath someone's car and like freaking overhauling it. Like it's not. I mean, really.
Yeah, you can do a lot from YouTube. Let's say that.
I mean, you can, but like
it doesn't replace expertise. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. If you've never done it before and you're looking it up on YouTube,
right.
But it is a way for people who might have more expertise than you to share the wealth with you. And
yeah, it is. It's wonderful. I'm just saying that it's yet another excuse that people have to like weasel out of really putting in the time and effort to like get some skills. And just go, well, I mean, I can Google it, so I don't need to know what that is. It's like, I mean, okay, but you're missing out.
so we were talking about meditation prior to this podcast. Um, how do you use meditation? How do you practice meditation and use it while being disconnected, or kind of disconnecting yourself from everything else,
Yeah.
so to speak? How do you do that? What's your
Like, I guess what I would say, is that a practice like meditation, and even just kind of a very basic kind of mindfulness meditation for people who are familiar, where you're just really just focusing on the breath, and it's not really necessarily associated with believing in anything or having any kind of other element to it, like a mantra or being in a certain position, or having it be guided by an instructor or anything like that. It's just something you can kind of literally do anywhere. The position and the posturing isn't necessarily that important, and it doesn't need to feel like this complex technical thing. It's just kind of like, okay, I closed my eyes and I just tried to focus on my breath. And I think even though it sounds so simple, I think this concept that people talk about a lot, kind of the monkey mind, if you can imagine just this very chaotic kind of childlike brain that just isn't managed, and it's just super disorderly, and it's just flooded with all these impulses all the time, I think is a product of the fact that we're training our brain to expect dopamine just like in every moment. And we were kind of talking about this too, is it's like, I think the problem is that before, I'm sure, in our evolutionary history, that we weren't being exposed to kind of these super dramatic, interesting experiences in every moment. I'm sure they were relatively rare, and so the pathways that made you feel like, ooh, something's happening, didn't light up like every 5 minutes. But the fact that now you can trigger that same pathway just by the flick of the thumb is, in some sense, we might say it's entertaining and kind of cool, but it's also sort of dangerous, because it makes us completely hooked to the system, where you basically have, and not necessarily make this political, but you have, people who are trying to make as much money as possible, who are basically incentivized to kind of try to hack your brain and to look for weaknesses in your psychology that they can take advantage of and just go, well, because of this bias, we know that they're going to want to look at this thing, and they're going to try to get as many eyeballs on that thing as they can, and so they're doing the best job possible with all the tools that they have to really suck you in and to really get you hooked on this stuff. And the problem is, it's not necessarily in your best interest, in terms of in terms of your health. So
Are you kind of talking about creating or having these people try and uh, create or stimulate positive feedback loops in your brain
right,
to make you keep coming back, to keep you try
yeah,
and make you want to keep in the loop?
yeah, and that's exactly what I'm saying. But it's not like they're bad people. It's just like they're businesses. They want to make money, and you have to be a you have to be an intelligent and responsible consumer, and you have to realize when if I stay on this platform, the longer I stay on this platform, like the more I'm going to want to continue to visit this platform every time you kind of find something, because it's like an addiction, you know, like it's one potato chip and then it's 10 and then it's the whole bag.
Okay, let's
It's not.
get this straight. There is never one potato chip. It is always the entire bag.
Yeah, that's
Very.
my point. And the problem is, like, there are different levels for different people, and some people just they can actually manage to have a couple potato chips. Other people just like start at one bag, and then from there it just you know they're stopping trucks on the side of the road. They can't be stopped. but but yeah, I think that practices like meditation or practices that incorporate some kind of mindfulness are really important because I think they remind us that if we decide to be, we can be in control of our brains to some extent, in control of our thoughts, and we get to decide whether or not we're being reactive to stuff. And I think that's really the the name of the game in some sense is if you're in a system where you're being flooded with tons of information, being in a constantly reactive state where your body's just kind of on autopilot, it's just automatically trying to deal with all the crap that's coming in, that is a system for burnout and derangement. So I think what you have to be able to do is kind of be proactive, and you have to decide with intention what you're going to look at. And in some sense, really what I'm saying is like if you could get to a point in mindfulness where you could go on social media and like literally just be on there for the number of minutes that you tell yourself you're going to be on there and not any longer, like that is really the ideal. Instead of I'm only going to be on here for 5 minutes and then like 45 minutes later you're like, oh crap, I've been like that is not a thing you want to happen because you're
You're losing
creating
control.
the habit and you're losing control. So
You
you
know,
got to watch
Ryan,
yourself.
I'm almost tempted to say that, like your parents and my parents, grew up in an environment where they were taught to do so, um, more so of taking the reins, so to
Yeah,
speak. And I also believe that with internet access, social media access, they had a little bit less to deal with.
yeah,
Maybe not less, but maybe
different things.
different
Yeah,
things to deal with. But I think that they were more so able to take control, and like we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, people like to have their lives directed. People,
yeah,
you start at A, you're going to go to B, and then you're going to go to C, and then D, and you're going to work your way up or work your way down, however you want to look at it.
yeah,
And you're gonna follow this routine, this set path that someone else has set for you,
yeah,
rather than creating your own.
yeah. That's basically the kind of the first part that you mentioned there is the point that I've been making is sort of that it's not necessarily that the generations before the current one and kind of the millennials and stuff like that were just so much more enlightened and they just had better parents who just knew what the hell was going on and they just imparted this wisdom. It's just that like when you're bored and you don't have a phone, you actually think about your life and like where you want to go with it. You're not just watching cat videos, sort of.
You always go to cat videos.
I mean, I go to cat videos because it's the low-hanging fruit, and like probably
Yeah.
everybody can identify with the
No,
time
no,
that
no, I'm
they've
not. I'm not
watched a
bagging
cat
on you
video.
for it. I'm not bagging on you for it. I'm just.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, I could think of some other examples, but it's just easy. Plus, I'd feel kind of weird if I had like 600 examples of different
No, you
videos
gotta
that
be
are a waste of
consistent. You gotta
time.
be
I
consistent.
was like, here's the cat video example. So, yeah, I'm using that one.
So, the stigma kind of that revolves around meditation, especially more so in males. Uh, Meditation seems to be a more feminine practice, a more I don't want to say passive and active, but kind of
Yeah.
more on the passive side and
I mean,
not really beneficial to.
I can see it. I think I mean the first thing I would say is that you kind of have to separate meditation from the woo woo that often gets associated with it, and I think.
What do you mean by woo woo? Like the.
Well, I was about to explain because, and with all respect to various schools of thought and beliefs, but I think speaking specifically about, I should say, the West in particular, and kind of the obvious, um, the obvious, sort of stance of secularism. I think what becomes very weird for us is having this practice like meditation that can be observed from kind of a secular perspective as something that clearly offers benefits and that clearly is something that is good for you and that smart people do, and then having attached with that kind of this sense that you need to believe weird other things and other sort of claims of the metaphysical that you need not believe um, to be a successful meditator. And I think what's important is that you remember that, like, there. I guess kind of dealing with your point about the masculine versus feminine argument. I mean, meditation's not yoga. Like, you're sitting with your eyes closed, trying to like manage your mind. Like, I mean, if you want to talk about like masculinity, like, okay, as a man, probably having your brain in order is something that you might want. So I don't think it's a masculine feminine thing. I mean, not that you're necessarily making the argument that it has to be, but I think I know you're just bringing up the point, but it's kind of like a stigma that like stretching is feminine. It's kind of like, get over yourself. You're tight. You
No,
need to stretch.
I entirely agree with you. It is definitely beneficial. Most people see benefit. Most, if not all, see benefits. And I'm not trying to disagree with you. I'm just saying that, particular in our generation and younger people, it can be seen as a masculine, feminine thing.
No, I know that. I'm just kind of putting it out there, but. I guess that just goes to prove my point. Is it's like, I mean, if you think this is a masculine feminine problem, you just haven't thought about this enough.
You just get over yourself. It's really not.
Yeah. Because, I mean, again, like, if people just were like sitting on park benches thinking about these questions, they would know how ridiculous that sounds to even like escape from someone's mouth. It's like, well, I mean, I'd meditate, but that's for girls. It's like, you hear yourself? All right, so what other points do we want to hit besides?
Is there any science behind meditation? Is there any proven?
Yeah, I was gonna talk a little bit about that. I think the important element to remember when it comes to meditation is that meditation fundamentally is not like an inherently non-secular or like religious practice. So it like the same benefits that you get from like sitting with your eyes closed and just like focusing on your breath. Well, that is meditation. So those are the same benefits, and that's something that we can look at and study. And so as far as data might go, I think it's easy to notice, and I'm not claiming to know what the exact numbers are, but that people who meditate obviously have a better stress response. They're going to experience less anxiety, right? They're going to feel that they have a greater sense of control over their lives and their thoughts. And once again, we also, I think, quite generally see a greater ability to control the development of habits and you could say the removal of bad ones. And I think that's something we look at is it's like it's it's something that it's pretty easy to struggle with. It's like, okay, well, I dealt with my anxiety and the stress, but now I need to break this bad habit that I have, and that can be difficult. But I would say that if you have a simple meditation practice, and I think the other important thing here is that it's not like it's an exact science. So I'm not claiming that like everybody should meditate for exactly 15 and a half minutes and they should do it after taking a cold shower, after having green tea that's exactly this temperature and this kind of lighting. Like I'm not making these kinds of claims. I'm just pointing out that like, hey, if you get good at being mindful, that's obviously a good thing, and meditation is just one tool that you can use for that. And I guess kind of elaborating on that a little bit more, I did want to make a distinction because I think part of the problem with meditation is I think people just don't really want to sit there and like be stuck with themselves for 20 minutes. And I totally understand that.
Again, we're talking about avoiding confrontation.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I think like you should meditate just so you can, if nothing else, prove to yourself that you don't have ADHD. But besides that, like there are other ways you can be mindful. Like you can be having a conversation and just decide to actually listen and like absorb,
interpret, digest,
yeah,
and actually, sorry to interrupt, but actually respond with a deeper level answer rather than okay,
yeah,
yep, for sure. Like it really engages conversation to be mindful. It helps move it along, and it not only that, I'm sure the other person, in the act of conversation, will actually now think higher of you, and
yeah,
kind of you'll build this relationship and this ability with this person to actually dig deep together and
yeah,
not have it be an awkward thing. It's kind
yeah,
of like you and me
yeah,
when we
exactly,
first met. We were playing video games and all that and having fun, and here we are. It's nice to have
yeah.
a deep conversation with someone. You can
Definitely like
really
it
understand
paves
the
the
other person.
road for being able to have that sense that you can like trust someone else with these thoughts. Because I think one thing that happens is like you want to have a deep conversation and just you get the sense that like people really aren't interested in getting that deep, or that they're just not listening half the time, so you don't bother. And I think, the obvious problem with that is I think, where else do we get to kind of sharpen our minds and develop our ideas if we're not able to bounce them off of other people and to kind of have that deep exchange of thoughts and perspectives? So I think that's really the value of conversations. And of course, there's small talk and there's value in that. But I think like the more times where you can take that opportunity to have a bit of a deeper conversation with somebody and actually like walk away, feeling a bit wiser is, you should take as many of those opportunities as you can.
And it's not only about walking away wiser. It's building that connection with the other
Yeah,
person. It's communication. It's build social skills. You're building
yeah,
upon your social skills. You're building upon your listening skills. You're building upon your mindfulness. You're building upon everything in your brain that is used during that conversation.
yeah,
It's improving yourself. It's learning a new perspective even.
yeah,
You could have one way of thinking about things, and you start talking to this other person who maybe grew up on the other side of the country, and maybe they shed some new light to you, and maybe that ends up changing your mind. Maybe it makes you end up thinking about it, and
yeah,
maybe you find some common ground together. You don't know until you get there. You don't know until you have that conversation.
yeah. That's, since we're kind of talking about, having kind of an influx of different perspectives in your life. I think um, the the kind of the number of echo chambers that you see nowadays, and it's something that makes sense because we know that we have, and I'm not going to give like an Eric Weinstein breakdown of media here because I don't think that's really necessary because well he already did it, but I think that the fact that we have kind of this algorithmic news thing that we have going on, I'll say it, that's the technical term, where you're going on these media sites, and you're basically getting content filtered to you that they think you're going to be most interested in, and that can be based on all sorts of things. And of course, as we know, the problem with that is that it reinforces the things that you already believe in. It reinforces your biases, and so you're not really being exposed to new things. And if
Your bubble's almost getting smaller rather than bigger.
it is getting smaller, and if like many people, you're a Google professor, that's that's not a good way to expand your horizons. So I think, and to your other point, I think something that happens probably that you don't really notice until later in your life when you're like thinking again, you have your midlife crisis. When you're like, holy shit, I've been on my phone my whole life and now everything's falling apart.
I've never looked up.
Exactly.
Is that the color of the sky?
No, like, but you know what I mean? Like when you're all alone and you realize that you don't have any like friends you can be real with, like have deep conversations with, you're gonna be fucking sad. Like really. You're gonna know then that you messed up. But yeah, I mean, we could talk more about that.
You want to?
Sure. I don't know. We're already here. I don't know. I mean, do you have anything else to add on
I've you're kind of introducing me to meditation. I've never really looked into it much. Not that I'm opposed to it. So, do you have any good places to start? You said you don't necessarily have to follow a routine, so to speak. You don't have to go through guided meditation, or you don't have to sit in certain postures. You just it's the art of just thinking, being mindful, kind of
Right.
clearing your mind, focusing on your breath.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that a beginner such as myself would appreciate knowing from someone who is maybe not an expert, but who
Yeah.
has a little bit of experience with it?
Dabbled.
Dabbled.
Yeah. Dabbled too much. Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say, kind of leading up to that, is when it comes to building habits, I have looked at many different people's perspectives and many different ways of doing that, and I can't necessarily speak to obviously what's going to work for everybody because different strokes for different folks. But I guess what I'll try to do is it's not so much the practice of meditation and like how you meditate that's important. Like you don't need to have your heels behind your ears for this to be an effective session. What I think is really important is again the mindfulness aspect, and the way that you get to being more mindful at the end of it is that you actually do it. Now, of course, I'm not saying anything controversial there, which is why I was talking about building habits, because for some of us that might mean doing micro doses every single day or multiple times a day so you can build that habit. Like some people might benefit from doing like 5-minute sessions 2 or 3 times a day. Other people might benefit from doing 20-minute sessions once a day. Some people might go, I like to meditate kind of sporadically throughout the week, or I'll just kind of do it whenever I feel that I need to, and I'll just do it for an amount of time that makes sense to me. And some people will go, I don't like the idea of having to sit down in kind of a routinized way, every single day or whatever the frequency is of doing it for this length of time. And so they might just say, what I prefer to do is just be in a conversation and just decide to be present in that conversation at that moment. And I think those are all perfectly valid ways of building the habit of meditation. So what I would suggest is that, you know thyself and um, figure out what it is, what kind of a practice that you'll actually adhere to. The other thing I would say is that there are um, lots of different kinds of meditation, and the one that I've been talking about, kind of the most basic form, I guess you could say one of the most basic forms, mindfulness meditation, is certainly not the only kind of meditation. It's certainly not even the only kind of more basic form of meditation. Like, as far as I know, and I'm blanking on the exact name of it, but there's meditation that's geared towards like self-compassion and kindness and stuff like that. There's meditation that's geared around a specific mantra. There's meditation, in some sense, there's meditation and practice like prayer, which is one thing that a lot of people will talk about, is that there's a lot of parallels between meditation and prayer, just, even like the Christian sense, because you're kind of doing a lot of the same things. And so a lot of the experiences that people have there, you could say, are, at least in part, kind of being generated by the fact that you're being present, and you're really there in that moment, which is really powerful. So again, like, I'm not an expert. I've dabbled with mostly mindfulness meditation, because I'm personally kind of a secular person. I'm not particularly thrilled by the idea of the mantra. I don't have anything against it. I just don't feel that it's necessary, because for me, I'm trying to not necessarily focus on a phrase, but, well, I guess not necessarily too specifically, but kind of um, what I've done when I meditate is, oftentimes I'll kind of do the traditional mindfulness meditation, where I'll just kind of close my eyes and get into a comfortable, sitting position or whatever, and just kind of breathe normally and focus on the breath. And then I'll take a deep breath in, and I'll hold my breath for like a few moments and just focus on sounds and things in the environment. And just, I might have another section where I do something similar and I focus on sensations arising in the body. So different things like that. But like I said, I think that since at least for me, the focus is on mindfulness. Like, there's a billion and one different ways to become more mindful. So it's not just about, like, hey, here's this one way of doing things, and take it or leave it. Like, there's so many different things that you can experiment with.
So there is no one kind of get rich scheme. It's kind of,
yeah. There is no get rich quick scheme on anything, though. It's like,
but that makes sense, especially with meditation, because it is about learning yourself. It is about going
really
into you, and it's not about going into what someone else says. Again, it's kind of taking charge, figuring out who you are, rather than having someone tell you who you are.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point too, because it's about listening to your unadulterated, I don't even know if I would call it a voice, like the signals from your body and your nervous system. It's not about what a guru told you is supposed to work. It's like, this is what my body is fucking telling me is happening here, and you need to be able to take note of that and understand what it's telling you. And I think once you become more in sync with your body, and that translates to everything, like food and exercise and the lifestyle choices that you're going to make. Like, literally, meditation and being mindful translates to you being better at all those things. And like I said,
about performance.
Yeah, there's so many things you could talk about there, but it's like, I think there is probably a reason why like 99% of like highly effective people meditate. I don't think it's a coincidence, really, or pretty much all of them have some kind of a mindfulness practice, or they journal. So it's kind of one or the other, and oftentimes both.
And in some cases, journaling acts as their mindfulness.
That's what I'm saying, is that
there's different ways to skin a cat, so to speak.
Yeah.
Don't actually skin a cat, guys.
Different ways to skin a mongoose.
Zangoose.
Yeah.
But there is different ways to go about things. There's everybody. No one in life walks down the same path. No one walks down a parallel path with somebody else.
Yeah.
At some point, lives turn different ways, do 180s, whatever it may be. It's whatever works for you. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. And kind of interjecting another idea into that we haven't really talked about yet. I think there's a concept that is relatively pervasive, and it's not just in Western culture or anything like that, but that I see where there's kind of this expectation that like once you get to a certain age, your life, the quality of your life just kind of declines and things aren't as good as they used to be. And I think that that's a very silly way of thinking because if you go into these situations expecting that to be the outcome, then I would say that's pretty much exactly what you're going to get. So it's kind of the you're the one setting out the plans and everything like that. So I mean, you're setting things up so that of course, that's going to be your destiny if you decided that in advance.
Negative feedback loop from the
Yeah,
beginning. You are setting yourself up for failure.
yeah. So what I would say is it's not necessarily about resisting that, but I think it's about and and this is another thing. Is like I think it's about legitimately believing that life is something that can continue to get better and that you gain something as you become older, and it's not just that as you're losing the integrity of your joints, your brain is becoming wiser, and you go, well, I can't walk down the stairs that way anymore. I'm not talking about that. I think like fundamentally this idea that life has to get worse, or that things aren't able to get better even, I think it's just absurd. I think we have to stop thinking that, and coupled with that, I don't think lying to yourself helps, and this is something that meditation I think is especially useful in sussing out. I think, and I've definitely been guilty of this, where it's like it's easy to like read something that's convincing or have an idea that you you have a sense is good, and there's kind of this idea of like fake it till you make it. I'm not saying that doesn't work for anyone, but it like totally doesn't work for me because when you're trying to lie to yourself in that sense, and we could talk about all the problems with that, but when you're trying to lie to yourself, you don't actually get the benefits of of the belief, because the point of belief, right, or I should say, is it's not about how strong you believe in something. It's about actually having good reasons to think that something is true. And so if you don't actually believe that your life can get better and you lie to yourself, well, now you're just kind of creating the sense that, okay, I want this thing to be true, but I know it's really not. And now on top of my life getting worse, I have this extra delusion. Well, that's not helpful, and that's not what you want. You want to, not fool yourself into thinking something. You want to actually have good reasons for thinking that your life can get better. And I would say that you absolutely have good reasons. Just you look around a little bit and you start looking up and not down all the time. And you take the time to work on yourself, and I think your life can absolutely get better with each day. And it doesn't have to be a a kind of peak and then a valley that you're just kind of walking down to get to the bottom of the rest of the way.
They say physically at least, men are usually in their peak about 28, 29, 30ish, and then
Yeah.
every year afterwards it's kind of on this physical decline. Um,
And half of that is just that they stop exercising, like, frankly.
that is true.
It's
You
not
you
just
stop
like, oh,
taking
your
care.
testosterone went down. It's like, well, no, you stopped working out. Is what
You
happened there.
stop
Bucko.
taking care of yourself, so to speak. It doesn't even have to be exercise. You just let
Yeah.
yourself go is kind of the
Right.
phrase I'm gonna say. But that really doesn't have to be the case.
It doesn't. I mean,
There are
there are
people who
80-year-olds that are badasses, that fucking sprint faster than a lot of 20-year-olds. So it's not. This is not an age thing. It's not like, oh, the number's too high. I can't do it anymore. It's like bullshit.
I think it's kind of becoming comfortable
Yeah.
with your life. It being in your comfort zone and no longer stepping outside of it, no longer challenging yourself, no longer pushing yourself to be greater. You're
Yeah.
kind of you're okay with being mediocre, and in a lot of aspects that may be fine for some people. However, I do not agree with that.
Yeah.
We only have one life. Why do you not want to?
Yeah. Why waste half?
That 30 years old isn't even half of it for most people.
Yeah.
With our life expectancy, that's not even half.
Yeah.
But why would you not utilize the rest of the years, even if it's picking up another freaking hobby?
Yeah.
So what? That is still expanding your knowledge. That is still learning a new trade, so to speak. That is still, I don't know, there are always things you can do. And as you get older, you'll become wiser generally.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can then surpass things you've learned onto younger individuals.
Yeah. And that's another thing I want to highlight is kind of the wiser element. And I know you're not saying this, but I think one assumption that it's easy to make is that the wisdom just like comes by accident. But it's a progression that you actually like earn and it
It
accumulates
comes from
over time.
experience.
So well, yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm saying it's part experience, but again, the assumption that anything is gained if you just happen to be 70 and you've been, living under a rock your whole life is an illusion. You haven't. You're just 70. So if you actually want to be wise, that's something you have to facilitate. Like, so I think it helps to kind of ask yourself the question of, or if I assume that I'm going to have this by this period of my life, what am I going to owe that to? Is it going to be that I just hit this age and now I have magical powers? And well, Sonny, when I was a kid, is that really going to happen, or is it something that you develop and it's something that you work on and you sharpen? And I think it's the latter. I don't think it's something that just appears. And not necessarily suggesting that like this is commonly thought, but I think there's some confusion there where it's just we assume that there's a lot of inevitabilities in life that have never been negotiated, and nobody talks about it. Like, and sure, there's some things that are true. Like, I'm not claiming that nothing declines with age or that there aren't like limitations of the body. Like, okay, there's entropy. No one's denying like laws of physics. I just think it's very a lot of the statistics about the actual decline that your body goes through in a period of like 10 or 20 years are very misleading. Number one, and number two, I don't think any of that is a reason to stop. And I also think, again, just because we accept that, okay, well, here's this thing, and in this amount of time, I'm supposed to lose this amount of strength. It's like, well, who says? What if I don't want to lose this amount of strength?
That's the thing.
It's not unstoppable.
You're talking about the law of averages here, and those studies are based around a group of people. Now,
right.
Everybody in this group leads independent lives,
right.
have independent issues with their body, and are frankly uncontrollable factors in this study.
Yeah.
And even with that, if say 30-year-olds, 30 to 35-year-olds are expected to lose maybe 20% of their physical strength in the next 10 to 20 years,
yeah.
You're going to have a 33-year-old who loses 50 to 60 in the next 5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to have a 33-year-old who quite possibly gains 20 to 30% strength in the next 10 to 20 years.
Exactly.
There is no way to really control these statistics, these misleading statistics. There's no way to set your independent and dependent factors, your controls.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is like my problem with statistics. It's like one of my favorite statistics. It's like, oh, well, 90% of shark attacks happen on the coastline, and I'm like, well, that's where the people are,
Why?
Like, it's kind of misappropriated because it's like, well, no shit, it's not like they're swimming to Iceland. Like Bill Burr makes that joke in stand-ups. He's like, they're swimming to Iceland. Like, come on, you pussies! Like getting eaten by sharks. They're hanging out, putting their toes in the water. It's not. It's like everybody's just out there, just freaking doing water angels. Like, oh shit, is that a wedge? Great white. Yeah, it doesn't really happen. It's not just a Jaws movie where everybody just happened to be doing a triathlon or something. Yeah. But
misleading statistics are quite frankly, a lot of people tend to fall for them.
Yeah. I don't know more to say on that, really.
I don't know. You can't fix stupid.
Yeah. What maybe I shouldn't like be writing a book in the effort to try to fix stupid. Maybe that was a mistake. I'm taking on the challenge because no one else will. They're like, oh shit, your IQ is too low. You're screwed. And that's like literally how half the world looks at you. They're just like, oh man, can't do anything. These fucking people can't even have them bring us water. It's like they can't even do that right.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Didn't really have anything else planned. I mean, I know we talked about lots of stuff we didn't exactly plan. I don't know.
Well, it's all great content. I'm glad we did this.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, and being totally transparent, like obviously, as the audience would know if I had a proper audience. This is like the first podcast that I've like really actually done with someone else, like in person. So this kind of a new experience. So kind of trying to coordinate this and like do this reasonably well has been kind of interesting.
I think it's gone pretty great. This is a first try.
Yeah, no, I think it's gone reasonably well, but I think we become more polished as with anything. So.
All right.
As long as we don't like realize after this the audio is terrible, and then I'm hoping because I've been looking at the bar.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, so I think that about wraps it up. So anyway, this has been Orion Webster and
Brian Lyles.
And
thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Later, guys.